Clear your desk. You're done. You're fired. Consider this your public termination. Those words came through my headset while 50,000 people watched. My name is Sloan Whitfield. I'm 49 years old. Until about 40 minutes before that moment, I was head of product development at CoreVault Systems. 6 years of my life, gone in one sentence. Nolan Briggs had his face filling my monitor. Mid-30s, sharp suit, the kind of guy who used words like disruption and ecosystem in every other sentence. He was barely hiding how much he was enjoying this. Your thinking is outdated, Sloan. CoreVault needs fresh leadership. The company needs innovation, not recycled concepts from someone who peaked years ago. The chat sidebar was exploding, thousands of comments rolling too fast to read. Some people were shocked, some were just there for the drama. I kept my hands flat under the desk where the camera could not see them. 6 years, 60-hour weeks, product launches at 2 a.m., client meetings I flew across the country for. All of it reduced to a public execution in front of investors, employees across 4 time zones, and everyone else who happened to tune in that morning. Security will escort you out, Nolan said, glancing at his watch. Your access codes are already deactivated. You have 30 minutes. Anything left behind becomes company property. He looked back into the camera. Any final words, Sloan? I did not rush. I reached up, unclipped my company lanyard, and set it on the desk where the camera could see it clearly. Thank you for the opportunity, I said. I wish the company continued success. His smile went a little stiff. He had wanted a meltdown. He wanted tears or anger or begging. Something he could point to later and say, see, that is exactly why I made the call I did. I did not give him that. The stream cut. My screen went black. Access terminated. 2 security guards were at my desk within minutes. Expressionless professional, just doing their job. Colleagues stared at their monitors and did not make eye contact. A few were already thinking about their own resumes, I could tell. When something like this happens in public, everyone starts wondering if they are next. I packed 6 years into a cardboard box, photos, a couple of notebooks. The small plant I had kept alive through 3 office moves. I walked through the open floor to the elevator without saying anything to anyone. Nobody said anything to me either. Outside, it was raining. I stood on the curb holding that box, waiting for my ride, getting soaked through my jacket. Here's what Nolan never understood about me. He saw a guy who drove an old truck and never upgraded his apartment. He saw someone who asked too many questions about budget reports and needed to be managed out before things got complicated. He thought he understood exactly what I was. He did not. I joined CoreVault 6 years earlier when the company was struggling. Outdated products, shrinking market share, a client list that was quietly looking for alternatives. During my interview, Nolan talked about bold moves and fresh thinking. He leaned forward in his chair and said he needed someone willing to break things to make them better. I believed him. That was my mistake, and it took me about 18 months to understand it. My first product for CoreVault was SecureLink, a platform that increased client retention by 68% in under a year. My second project doubled the active user base. By year 3, I was running a team of 17 people and delivering results that Nolan showcased at every investor meeting and industry conference. He called me his secret weapon. His hand always found its way to my shoulder when he introduced me to clients. I noticed how quickly he moved away once the handshake was done. The warning signs came slowly at first. Strategy meetings I was not invited to, even though my products were the ones being discussed. Colleagues who started acting uncomfortable around me without explanation. The phrase Nolan thinks we should take a different direction appearing before my input was dismissed. Then my team members got reassigned one by one. My budget got cut, my office got moved to a smaller space, 2 floors down from the executive level. Restructuring, he said each time, nothing personal. Every single time he did it, I bought more CoreVault stock. That is the part nobody knew, not Nolan, not the board. Not my former colleagues who were now quietly updating their LinkedIn profiles while I stood in the rain. Nolan spent his growing bonuses on a lake house in the mountains and a leased car he replaced every 2 years. I kept driving the same 2011 truck and lived in the same house. I bought the year I joined the company. He never once asked where my money was going. He never thought to look. He assumed I was just a careful guy, maybe a little boring, the kind of employee who worked hard and went home and did not think much about anything beyond the next product cycle. That was his first mistake. And it turned out to be the one that cost him everything. That evening, I sat in my living room and watched CoreVault stock dip in after-hours trading. The termination news had gotten out faster than Nolan probably expected. Industry forums were already buzzing. My phone was full of messages from former colleagues, recruiters, and a few journalists who had caught the stream. I did not answer any of them. At 9:17 that evening, an international number called, "Good evening, sir." The voice was steady, older, measured. "This is Reed Calloway." Chairman of the board at CoreVault Systems. I've just landed in Singapore and I heard what happened today. Completely unacceptable. He called me sir. I knew exactly why. The quarterly shareholder filing had updated that afternoon, a few hours after the live stream ended. Reed had checked it after hearing the news. What he found there explained the phone call, the tone. And that one word, I held 26% of CoreVault's outstanding shares. That made me the largest individual shareholder in the company. Nolan had just fired me from on camera in front of 50,000 people. I've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow, Reed said. 3 p.m. your time. Can you join by video? I will be there, I said. 20 minutes later, Nolan texted. Minor misunderstanding today. Let's talk privately before this escalates. Breakfast tomorrow, my treat. I put the phone face down on the coffee table and left it there. He could wait by 6 a.m. The next morning, Nolan had sent 7 more messages. I read them in order while my coffee brewed. We should talk before things get complicated. This silence is unprofessional. I'm trying to help you here, Sloan. The board will side with me on this. They always do. Last chance to handle this quietly. And the final one at 6:42 a.m., Reed called me this morning. Whatever you told him, I have already handled it. No need for you to join the board meeting. Stay home. I poured my coffee and smiled at that last one. He thought he had gotten there first. He had no idea that Reed had called me before calling anyone else. He had no idea why, and he had absolutely no idea what that shareholder filing actually meant for the conversation that was about to happen. At 2:55 p.m., I connected to the video conference from my home office. Board members appeared on screen one by one, 13 people I knew by name but had rarely spoken to directly. Nolan had always kept himself positioned between the board and the rest of the company. Every communication filtered through him, every presentation delivered by him. That was not an accident. Nolan joined last. His expression when he saw me on that screen was something I will not forget. Confusion first. Then a fast recalculation behind his eyes. Then something close to anger, held down tight under a professional smile. There has been a miscommunication, he said immediately. Sloan's termination was a standard leadership decision. It does not require board intervention. Reed's voice was calm and flat. His performance record disagrees. I have reviewed product development metrics going back 6 years. Every major innovation that drove our growth came from Sloan's department. Every product that fell short came after you removed him from the process. Nolan shifted in his chair. With respect, Reed, you're looking at correlation. My strategic direction is what made those products succeed. Enough. That was Petra Dunmore, a retired founder who had built and sold 2 companies before joining the board. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The live stream termination alone is a governance issue. 50,000 viewers, Nolan. Our stock dropped 11% yesterday. A temporary market reaction, he said. It will stabilize once I announce our new strategic direction next week. Which is? Reed asked. Nolan launched into his plan. Acquisitions of 3 smaller competitors, aggressive international expansion, a pivot toward enterprise clients. He spoke for 8 minutes without pausing. Some board members nodded, others frowned at the scope and the speed. When he finished, Reed turned to me, Sloan. You have been quiet. Nolan cut in before I could open my mouth. He is no longer with the company. His input is not relevant to this discussion. Reed looked at Nolan for a moment, then back at me. Actually, Sloan holds 26% of outstanding shares. That makes him our largest individual shareholder. His input is about as relevant as it gets in this room. The silence that followed was the kind that fills up a space completely. Nolan's face did something I had never seen it do before. The confidence dropped away just for a second, and underneath it was something that looked a lot like fear. Then he pulled it back together. That is not possible. The quarterly filing updated yesterday afternoon, Reed said, which is why I called this meeting. Every person on that screen turned to look at me. I had spent 6 years being talked over, cut out of meetings, relocated to smaller offices, and publicly humiliated in front of 50,000 people. I took a breath and started speaking with the kind of calm that comes not from confidence in the moment, but from 6 years of knowing exactly what I had built and exactly what had been taken from me. Nolan's expansion plan has 3 fundamental problems, I said, and shared my screen. I walked through each one. The acquisition targets had overlapping products that would create redundancy, not growth. The international markets he had chosen lacked the infrastructure to support CoreVault's current platform architecture. The enterprise pivot ignored the mid-market client base that accounted for 63% of our recurring revenue. Board members leaned forward. Real questions came, the kind that meant people were actually thinking and not just being polite. Petra asked about the revenue breakdown. Another member pushed on the acquisition pricing. A third wanted to know what a realistic integration timeline looked like. Nolan interrupted twice. Both times Reed let him finish and then turned back to me. When it was done, Reed called a vote. The result was not close. By 4:30 p.m., the board had appointed me interim CEO of CoreVault Systems. Nolan was offered a severance package contingent on a smooth transition and a signed non-disparagement agreement. As the other board members disconnected, Nolan stayed on the call. The professional mask was gone. "You planned this," he said. His voice was flat. "All those years buying shares quietly while pretending to just be another team member. I invested in a company I believed in," I said. "You stopped doing that somewhere along the way." "You will not last 90 days, he said. "CEO is not about product knowledge. It is about relationships. Clients who trust me personally. Board members I have spent years building rapport with. You think because you own stock that changes any of that? For a second, I actually sat with the question. He was not entirely wrong. The development side was where I lived. Boardrooms and investor calls and client relationship management were his world, not mine. That part was true. "Maybe," I said, "but I will have something you never did. People who know their work actually matters to someone in charge." I ended the call before he could answer. I sat in my home office for a few minutes after that, not moving. The room was quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street. 24 hours earlier, I had been standing on a curb in the rain holding a cardboard box. Now I was the CEO of the company that had put me there. It did not feel like victory yet. It felt like the starting gun. Walking into the CoreVault office the next morning felt like stepping into a different building that happened to look exactly the same. The security guard who had watched me carry that cardboard box out 36 hours earlier nodded when I came through the front door. Not a word, just a nod. That small gesture said more than he probably realized. Ren Lacey was waiting by the elevator. She had been my assistant for 3 of my 6 years at CoreVault until Nolan quietly had her reassigned to facilities management 4 months ago. No explanation, no performance issue, just gone one Monday morning, replaced by someone younger who reported everything back to Nolan's office. "Welcome back," she said. There was a smile she was trying to keep professional and not quite managing. "Your new office is ready." New office. The CEO's office. She gave up on the professional smile entirely. "I was asked to help you get settled." We rode up in the elevator together. She leaned slightly closer. "Everyone is talking about what happened. The live stream, then Nolan clearing out his things this morning. People are calling it the silent coup." The doors opened on the executive floor. Nolan was standing right there. He had a cardboard box under one arm, same size as the one I had carried out. He was dressed well, composed, every inch the professional. 2 board members had just stepped out of a conference room nearby and were watching. Our eyes met. Neither of us moved for a moment. "Congratulations on the promotion," he said. His voice was even and pleasant, the way it always was when he had an audience. "I'm sure you will bring your unique perspective to the role." I nodded and stepped aside to let him reach the elevator. He walked past me without another word. As the doors began to close, he looked back. "Just remember, every CEO serves at the pleasure of the board, and boards can be persuaded." The doors shut. I turned toward my new office and kept walking. I could feel every set of eyes on the floor tracking me. This was my first moment as CEO, before any meeting, before any announcement. How I moved through that hallway would set the tone for everything that came after. I kept my pace steady and walked through the glass door without looking back. What came next was something I had not expected. Ride had arranged, without telling me, for Nolan to remain with the company for 90 days as strategic advisor. The reasoning, explained to me 30 minutes before the executive team meeting, was client continuity. 2 of our largest accounts had direct relationships with Nolan and had already flagged concern about the leadership change. The board felt his presence during the transition would keep them from walking. I understood the business logic. I did not have to like it. Nolan walked into that first executive team meeting and sat down across from me like he had never left. 8 department heads in the room, all his hires, all promoted under his leadership. When they saw him take a seat, the tension in the room dropped visibly. They relaxed. He was still there. That meant to them that nothing had really changed. He spent the next hour doing what he did best, talking, redirecting, referring to ongoing projects as his initiatives. When questions came from the team, most of them landed on his side of the table first. After the meeting, when everyone else had filed out, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me the way you look at someone you're trying to be patient with. "Quite a learning curve," he said. "Product development and CEO are 2 completely different games." "I know," I said. "That is why I'm paying attention." He smiled and let it go. The next 4 weeks were a slow and careful war with no visible front line. Nolan scheduled client calls without telling me, then blamed the miscommunication on the transition chaos. He held informal sessions with individual department heads where he quietly walked back decisions I had already approved. Twice I found out a change I had authorized had simply not been implemented, with no explanation and no paper trail. Externally, the pressure was just as real. CoreVault's stock bounced up and down as analysts wrote about leadership uncertainty. A piece in a tech industry journal described me as a product specialist elevated beyond his experience level. 2 major clients formally put their contract renewals on hold pending clarity on strategic direction. The board started calling more frequently. Reed's tone shifted from supportive to measured. During one check-in call, he mentioned carefully that Nolan had suggested extending the advisory period past 90 days given the rocky transition. After that call, I sat at my desk for a long time looking at the performance metrics on my screen. Product development velocity had increased 22% since I took over. Customer satisfaction scores were trending up. The new roadmap I had pushed through was getting positive early feedback from the clients who had actually seen it. The numbers were good. The perception was not. That was the problem. As long as Nolan was positioned as the steady hand in the background, the experienced one, the one who really knew how this company worked, my authority would always have a ceiling. I stopped trying to outmaneuver him in meetings. I stopped pushing back every time he contradicted me in front of the team. I let him talk. I let him feel comfortable. And I started working nights, not on the roadmap, not on client strategy, on the financial reports. 5 years of quarterly statements pulled up on my second monitor while the rest of the office was dark and quiet. I was not entirely sure what I was looking for. I just knew that a man willing to humiliate someone publicly to protect his position was a man protecting something more than his title. Around midnight, 6 weeks into my tenure, I found the first number that did not add up. A development cost report from 3 years back. A project I had led personally, the budget figure in the official quarterly filing did not match what I remembered approving. The difference was not small. It was not a rounding error, it was not a misallocation between departments, it was money that had gone somewhere I could not immediately account for. I pulled more reports, cross-referenced figures across quarters, compared the official filings against my own archived records from that period, the ones I had kept on a personal drive out of habit, the same habit Nolan had probably assumed was just me being overly careful. The pattern appeared slowly, then all at once. Development costs across multiple projects consistently inflated. The excess amounts flowing out to third-party consultants whose names I did not recognize, and I should have recognized them. These were projects my team had built from the ground up. I picked up my phone and called Ren. "Cancel my schedule tomorrow," I said, "and get me a private meeting with Maeve Hollis from Financial Audit. Tell her it stays between us for now." Maeve Hollis had been running financial audit at CoreVault for 11 years. She was precise, methodical, and completely unimpressed by titles. When I walked her through what I had found, she did not react with shock or disbelief. She looked at the numbers the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. Quietly, carefully, already knowing what questions to ask next. "Give me access to the payment records," she said. "Not the summary reports. The raw transaction logs. Can you do that without flagging it internally?" "I run the audit department," she said. "It is literally my job to pull payment records." Over the next 2 weeks, Maeve and I worked separately and compared findings at the end of each day. She had the access. I had the institutional memory of every project those payments were supposedly tied to. Together, we built a picture that got worse the more clearly it came into focus. 14 transactions over 5 years, $7.4 million in total. All of it routed to third-party consultancies listed in the books as providing strategic development support on projects my team had built. Consultancies whose names appeared nowhere in any project file, any team communication, any vendor meeting I had ever attended or approved. Maeve ran the registration checks. Every single one of those firms had been incorporated within 60 days of receiving its first payment from CoreVault. Their listed addresses were residential. Their phone numbers connected to generic voicemail boxes. Their websites had been created the same week the contracts were signed and had not been updated since. And every single one of them had a direct connection to Nolan Briggs, his brother-in-law, his college roommate, his personal financial advisor of 12 years. I sat with that information for a full day before I did anything with it. Then I thought about the timeline. The first inflated invoice appeared 14 months after I launched SecureLink. Right around the time Nolan started keeping me out of the financial review meetings. The payments increased every time my team delivered something significant. The last transaction cleared 9 days before he fired me on that live stream. He had not fired me because my thinking was outdated. He had not fired me because CoreVault needed fresh leadership or a new strategic direction. He fired me because I had started asking questions about budget discrepancies in my department. I was the only person in the company with enough project-level knowledge to spot what he had done, and I was getting close. The annual shareholder meeting fell on day 87 of Nolan's 90-day advisory period. I had not planned it that way, but I did not move to reschedule it either. Board members, major investors, and the full executive leadership team gathered in the main conference room. Nolan arrived early and took a seat near Reed, close enough to signal alignment without being obvious about it. He nodded at me when I walked in, comfortable. Confident, 87 days of quiet sabotage, and he still believed he was going to walk out of this room with the upper hand. I greeted everyone, sat at the head of the table, and opened a folder. Before we move to the formal agenda, I want to address my leadership performance during this transition period directly. I slid a bound document across the table to each person in the room. These materials outline systematic financial irregularities spanning 5 years. Specifically, the diversion of $7.4 million to consulting firms that provided no actual services to CoreVault. The room went completely still. Nolan's expression shifted in stages. Dismissal first. Then the beginning of something harder to control. These firms share a single common thread, I continued. Every one of them is registered to an individual with a direct personal connection to Nolan Briggs, his brother-in-law, his college roommate, his personal financial advisor. Reed opened his copy and began reading. His jaw tightened. Nolan stood. This is a calculated move to protect his own position. Those consultancies provided legitimate strategic services to this company, such as, I asked, market analysis, competitive research, things that fall outside a product developer's day-to-day visibility. We contacted each firm, I said. Their offices do not exist at the addresses on file. Their phone numbers go to voicemail boxes registered to no business entity. Their websites were created within the same week their first CoreVault payments cleared. 2 of the investors at the far end of the table had stopped taking notes and were looking at Nolan directly. Furthermore, I said, the timing of my public termination lines up precisely with the period when I began raising questions about cost discrepancies in my department. I was not fired because my ideas were stale. I was fired because I was the one person in this company who could read those project budgets and know something was wrong. Reed turned to Nolan. Is any of this inaccurate? Nolan's answer came in pieces, each one contradicting the last. The board members stopped asking follow-up questions. They had enough. Mr. Whitfield's findings are accurate, Maeve said from the far end of the room. Every figure in that document has been independently verified by my team. 2 men I did not recognize stepped through the side door. Maeve had made a call the previous afternoon that I had not asked her to make and would not have stopped her from making. Financial Crimes Division of the District Attorney's Office. Nolan looked at them, then at me, then at Reed. He did not say anything else. He was escorted out of the building. No severance. The criminal conduct clause in his contract voided every dollar of it. Reed found me in the hallway 20 minutes later. The board is removing the interim designation effective today, he said. Unanimous vote. That afternoon, I stood in front of a live stream for the second time in less than 3 months. 60,000 viewers. The stock ticker visible on the monitor behind me was moving in one direction. Today is a new chapter for CoreVault, I said. One built on the idea that the people doing the work deserve to be seen, credited, and trusted. Nolan had spent 8 years building a version of this company where his name was on everything and everyone else was interchangeable. He wanted history to remember him as the man who built CoreVault into something real. History will remember him as the fraud who nearly hollowed it out from the inside. I'm just the guy who was paying close enough attention to stop it. If you have ever been the most experienced person in the room and still got treated like you were invisible, you already know this story. You lived some version of it. The question is never whether the truth eventually surfaces. It always does. The question is whether you positioned yourself to be standing there when it did. Drop a comment below if this one hit close to home. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, send it to them.